Fresh boys on the track.
What's going on YouTube? It's your boy QuiySpeaks, and thank you for tuning in to QuiySpeaks TV. So this past week, the topic of discussion has been education and the education system. And the two questions that were being asked were, does having a degree make you educated? And does not having a degree make you uneducated? So, of course, I brought my bro Herson over here to talk to us about it. As a PhD student in education, I feel as though he would have some very good knowledge to share with us. So real quick, Herson, just introduce yourself to the channel.
Well, thank you for having me once again. My name is Herson Sanchez. I'm a second-year doctoral student at Florida International University, pursuing a PhD in higher education. And my research focus centers around race and racism. So, thank you for having me.
No problem, bro. It's been a long time coming. So like I said, we've been talking about this for, a couple weeks now. And, everybody has their mixed opinions on this question. But the main question we want to tackle is, does having a degree make you educated? What are your thoughts? You can feel free to drop some comments. I'm pretty much interactive with my audience on Instagram and Twitter. So, feel free to find me on Instagram at Kai.speaks. And, share your opinions or anything like that, and I'll get to it. But, with this question is interesting because when we talk about education, this is my point of view, we often talk about one vehicle of education, one type of education, and that is proper schooling, going from a K to 12 school and then getting into college and getting degrees, or what you would call it. And that's pretty much the only type of education that we really either value or deem as true education. But there's a lot of people out there that are educated and wise people who haven't even been to colleges or universities or haven't even thought about it. They found their own education through just reading books. That's what books were created for in the first place. Experiencing different things in their own lives and making them wiser and making better decisions. But, what do you feel about the question? Does having a degree make one educated?
So I think a couple of things, just kind of listening to you. You also mentioned the word school.
Right.
Or schooling. So in this question, there are some keywords. Degree, or degrees, education, schooling. Degrees is interesting because we can only get a degree from an accredited institution. Right. So within this falls public universities, private universities, for-profit universities like your DeVry, University of Phoenix. And it's interesting how we kind of compare these, right? How someone will say, I went to University of Phoenix, and people will we won't take that seriously.
Right.
Even though they've had some type of classroom experience, whether virtual or in person. But then, so that's interesting in itself, how we put kind of parameters on what a degree is and what it is not. Education and schooling, I think, are different concepts. I think the United States does a very good job at schooling people. By schooling, I mean it gets into this mechanical type of actions with people. So think about when you go into a classroom.
Right.
Most of the times, chairs are in rows. Why are chairs in rows in the classroom? Right.
That's a good question.
Right. And when we look at this historically, sometimes chairs would be in rows because they were trying to train people to go into factory work.
Okay. Or I was going to say like office settings, like cubicles, and being used to assigned seating.
I think the interesting thing about this, I don't think we can have this conversation without talking about power. And one of the ways power works is through schooling. It's through implicit, sometimes invisible ways that we can't really that aren't obvious to us. So when you go into a classroom and you sit in these rows, and they're in rows and columns, right? That's the type of schooling that we're already telling you that when you come in here, you need to sit down, and there's someone at the front of the room who is the person in charge of this space.
Right.
You just needed to know your place. It's very interesting how sometimes we don't have assigned seating, but then we end up
sitting in the same seat every
place,
day. Yeah.
Right. So know your place, right? And then you have someone at the front of the room purportedly teaching.
And to enforce that place.
Right, and enforces this place, right? So that to me is schooling. This mechanical, this rote type of situations that we put people in because we're training them for perhaps a job. And this is where I guess I go into education. I agree very much with James Baldwin. If anyone has read Talk to Teachers, phenomenal essay where he says that the purpose of education is for one to begin to question whether this is black, whether this is white, and he says whether there's a God in heaven or not, and being able to become comfortable with questioning. So creating in someone a criticality to not just accept what's being given to you. So to not just accept that these chairs are on rows, but to ask why are these chairs in rows in the first place. Right? And that, for James Baldwin, is the purpose of education. And I very much agree with him. But I get both components. I'm pursuing a PhD. It's a type of schooling, but I'm also being I'm also being given an education because of the type of way that I'm being trained to think, to question, to constantly question, to be skeptical of articles that I read, to be skeptical of people, to be skeptical of concepts that I'm introduced to. So for me, I'm getting a little bit of both, schooling and education. But that's, I don't know.
And it's funny that you mentioned some kind of mechanical structure, some kind of repetitiveness in the schooling that we go through, because you see it a lot, like even like from our parents to our parents' parents. We grow up to be taught to, you got to go to school to get good grades, to get into a college or university, to get good grades in there, to get a good job, to pay off the loans that you had to take out just to go to that college or university. But I say that to say this: we're being taught and we're being introduced to a structure of learning to be workers, like you said, to look for good jobs. So we're not necessarily taught to think critically and be creators and create our own opportunities, but we're taught to assimilate into other spaces to do the work for others. And back to would you consider one educated if they have a degree? We oftentimes don't question our managers or our bosses or the CEOs at our firms, because that CEO might have started the firm that you work at off of his family's inheritance, some money that was already in the family, and use that money to hire people like yourself to drive the company in the positive direction. And even your manager might have failed classes that you've tried extremely hard to succeed in. So like just these examples already itself doesn't prove that just having a degree automatically deems you as educated.
And even to nitpick at what you're saying a little bit, this idea of succeeding and failing, right? That in itself is a type of schooling. It's interesting how we are given tests, right? To supposedly, it's supposed to demonstrate that if you learned something or not. This idea of testing, and then what happens when someone doesn't pass? What does that mean for this person, for this student? What message are we sending them? And if you fail, what does that mean? So if you pass, you're not considered a good student. But then I would question the student of what? So even these ideas of pass and failing are very interesting and something to be critiqued and to be questioned. This idea of going to school to get a job is a rather new phenomenon, right? That dates back probably to the 1970s, 1960s, when this really became a push of going to school to get jobs. Getting an MBA, a Master's of Business, that type of stuff is very new. Like it hasn't been around as long as
like post-industrial age for
it relates back to that. The core subjects when higher education started in the United States were philosophy. It was stuff around clergy, like religion. It wasn't really this push for business degrees. That wasn't a thing. So this is a rather new thing, and we see the fancy word now is called neoliberalism. It's this new iteration of capitalism where basically we are taught to see everything through an economic lens. So I go to school for the purpose of getting a job, not to learn something new, not to be challenged, not to be pushed to my limits, not to try to think about things in different ways, but I'm going there to get a job.
Right.
So now you have a major. And anything that falls outside of that major is an extracurricular, right? So we have all these labels for things that fall outside of education.
Not necessary.
Not necessary, exactly. Because the only reason you're here is so I can train you to do your job.
Right.
There's a great book that I recommend to everyone called Anti-Intellectualism in the United States by Richard Hofstadter. He's arguing, kind of similar to James Baldwin, that for him there's a difference between intelligence and an intellect. Intelligence is something that we want in workers. We want you to be able to grasp these concepts so you can go to work and you can do them over and over and over again every single day for the rest of your life. That's an intelligent person. We don't want you to be intellectual, because intellectual now is critiquing, it's questioning, it's reading. Right? We don't want you to be this in the United States, because you can't do this at work. You were talking about how you don't question your supervisors, your CEOs, your managers.
Right.
Yeah, because we don't. James Baldwin would argue that we don't want that type of person around, because now you're considered dangerous. You're considered abnormal. You're othered. So it's a great book that you also check out. But he's saying that in the United States, we don't want intellectual people. We don't. We don't want this. We want intelligent people. And by we, I mean by societal standards. So yeah. That's
a very good point. And, okay, so like I said, this has been going on for like a week and a half. And we do have like some people who comment on this, their opinions, as I asked in advance. Yeah. So like some of the comments that were made, it's very interesting. Let me know what you think about this comment. So an educated person is one who knows what she or he truly desires, and a degree cannot do that for you until you understand that. So I know what are some of your thoughts on that that comment? And for me, you know, it's easy for him to be misinterpreted when making that comment. I kind of see where he's going, but first I want to see where did you interpret out of that comment?
So could you read it one more time?
Yeah. So an educated person is one who knows what she or he truly desires, and a degree cannot do that for you until you understand that.
I think this idea of truly desiring that in itself is very vague, very complicated. Again, we expect people to go to college at the age of 18, 17, right after high school. Right? This has become very normalized in the United States. Why? Like, what kind of a person knows? Like, I don't even know. I'm just now beginning to know who I am, and I'm 29. It's taken me a while to really try to figure out my identities. Who am I? What do I think about this? And I'm still thinking through all of this. So for me, a desire can be relegated to a material. I want a degree. But a desire can also be interpreted in a different way.
Right.
It's like something else that you want to do.
And let me elaborate just real quick, because you said you don't even know at 18, 17 years old when you're going to college, you don't even particularly know what you want to get into. And most of the time it's influenced by the people around you. And
absolutely.
That's perfect for my example, because 17, 18 years old, when I graduated from high school, I went to school to be in accounting. Why? Because I was told that I was good at math, and we need black accountants, so you might as well go to
socialized.
School. Exactly. So it was like, I didn't question it. I didn't think critically as to why I should go into accounting. I just
very
did.
well schooled.
Exactly. So I just went into it. But then later, as I'm going through the phases, accounting had nothing, and I just didn't want to go into it in layman's terms. I just did not enjoy accounting. I did not enjoy sitting behind a desk, punching numbers in for other people. I'm a social type of person, so I like to interact with people. And so that's when I saw that later on I wanted to go into hospitality. And even now, hospitality is very vague, because, you know, I see myself always wanting to touch on, you know, social issues and this and that. But it's like, you kind of have to be, you can't really talk about that as much if you're into a field like hospitality, where you're working with a lot of different types of people, and you're taught to, you know, kind of mask your opinions towards social issues and everything like that. So,
and it's interesting that even in itself, that how social issues has become like a sect, like an entity,
right?
As opposed to it being part of everything. Hospitality, redlining was policy put into place to say that POCs, people of color, specifically black people, part Hispanics, could not live in certain parts of the city because you are of this racial category, right? That very much intertwines with hospitality, right? But we're not taught to think about it that way, because when you go get a degree in hospitality, you're going to take hospitality classes, because that's where you're here, to get a hospitality job. We're not going to give you these social issues type of classes. I'm talking about race, gender, LGBTQ, you know, whatever. So that's part of schooling. It all goes back to the schooling concept. It's interesting. In late 1700s, there was this Frenchman, Alexis de Tocqueville. He had a book called Democracy in America, something like that. Very popular political science book. He came to the United States to analyze how Americans were.
Right.
And he took notes on all these people. And he was writing back in, as problematic as a figure as he was, but he was writing back in the late 1700s how Americans don't like to read. How Americans, and when they do read, they only like popular culture type stuff. This is over 300 years ago that this man was writing. And it's still the same today. Mm-hmm. We don't like to read as a population. Most Americans aren't very literate.
So a lot of newspapers are printed on a third grade reading level. You know?
Yeah, it's horrible, and it's necessarily their fault. It's part of schooling. I don't think we're meant to be good readers, because if we were, then we'd be reading a lot more and questioning a lot more things. And it gets back to what Baldwin is arguing, that we don't want this type of person around. Mm-hmm. So to me, part of education is reading. To me, that's a core part of education, reading. And being able to critique what you're reading and being able to question it. Because reading can really open your mind to so many different types of concepts. But yeah.
And to go back to that comment that was made about, education, and a degree can't really do anything for you unless you already unlocked what you truly desire for yourself. Again, it's easier to interpret that another way, and I might not even be right with my interpretation of mm-hmm. what the comment meant. But for me, I kind of saw it as, taking knowledge and learning how to apply it to your goals and your aspirations, instead of applying it to what the social norm is. Like how we're taught to, if you're in hospitality, you're taking hospitality courses to get a job in hospitality, as opposed to if you go into hospitality because you know that you would like to I don't want to use the word succeed, but you aspire to be in hospitality for yourself, and you want to create an opportunity for yourself. Then you will learn to apply what you learned in hospitality, and take those courses, read books, and go further and beyond what you're being taught in the classroom, and try to discover more things for yourself. And you have a question, ask that question, because oftentimes we don't like to ask questions. Oftentimes, if things aren't explained in the classroom, we don't want to dig deeper and find it outside of the classroom, find those resources outside. So I think that's part of it too. But it could go either way with that question.
I completely agree. And what your friend is saying in this is saying what your degree can do for you. When we use that type of language, we're giving the degree a life, as if this is something that is alive. Like, number one, a degree can't do anything for you. It has no life on its own. You can potentially utilize your degree to do something, but even then, there's some really good articles that I can send out to, some good research around. So Obama and all these other presidents have always especially Obama, talks about how you go to school so you can get a good job. Mm-hmm. Okay, what that doesn't really make sense, because we're putting out a lot of people with degrees, but we're seeing a lot of people unemployed, or if they're not unemployed, they have a job that doesn't pay a lot. Mm-hmm. It's paying like very low salaries. Mm-hmm. So the point isn't necessarily the degree, right? It's money. It's tied back to money. That's kind of what your friend is also kind of saying a little bit. So degrees, if we go to school for an actual education, and by actual I mean a place where it's going to really embrace you questioning, it's going to teach you to question, how to question, then I think that's great. But if you go to school to get a degree to get a good job, most likely, especially if you go to a public university, a good job that pays well is going to be tough to get, because most of the high-paying jobs are in STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, or math. And most of these people are going to your Ivy Leagues. So most of us are not going to make a lot of money, even if we get these jobs. If we go to public universities, community colleges, we're not going to get super high paying jobs. It might take you years and years, as opposed to someone who goes to maybe an Ivy League, gets a science degree, and starts off at like $100,000 a year. So even that, we should question the logic of going to school to get a good job. What do you mean by good? If you mean high paying, that's most likely false.
And also we have to oftentimes think about the restrictions that they put on it too, because how hard it is for POCs to get into Ivy League schools, or how hard it is to obtain the financial aid to even get into a school.
Yeah.
We have to think about that as well. So when one
Absolutely.
says, because like the educated black man, educated black woman, for me that phrase, I grew up, saying that,
Yeah.
But now as I'm starting to think critically and things like that, I'm starting to not necessarily like that phrase because you're deeming your counterparts, your uneducated counterparts, unworthy of salvation, unworthy of equal opportunity, unworthy of, good jobs if they want a job, or you're saying because they don't want a job or because they didn't want to go to school that they're kind of lost and they don't. It's just like we find different ways to separate ourselves from each other in many forms. And education is one of them. And
absolutely,
yeah.
or lack thereof, or schooling, or degrees. Probably degrees is probably maybe the word that we're looking for instead of education.
Right.
But that's something that I was thinking about last night. I was like, maybe because I was telling my line brother something, and I was like, oh yeah, someone's educated. He's like, what do you mean by that? He called me out, right? And I was like, oh, fair point. So maybe degrees is the word that is more appropriate in this case. That's maybe what we're more accurate as far as what we're trying to imply. Malcolm X was a person who dropped out of school, ends up going to prison, ends up really getting into reading. And people asked him, if you read his autobiography, people asked him, like, where'd you go to college? I think he said they got his master's in prison or something like that. What he was saying is that he read. That's all he would do, just read. And if you watch his videos, his interviews, phenomenal speaker, extremely intelligent, didn't go to school. He read. That to him was education, reading, which was extremely powerful, especially for Black liberation. Understanding that Malcolm X was so intelligent. He was talking about the reason he had the X on his name is because he was not going to take the slave master's last name. How would you know this other than reading and conversing with people who like to talk about this stuff? And that's one thing I think where I wish when it comes to education we did more is talk to each other. Every time we chat and chop it up, I'm like, oh, okay, I didn't think about it this way. Okay, let me think about it this way. Okay, that is part of education. Teachers, you look at teachers working in the K-12 system, oftentimes the way they're set up is so they don't have a lot of time to speak with each other because it's class dismissed from here, class dismissed from there. It's very rare, very few opportunities where they actually can converse with one another.
Wow, I never really thought of that.
Because what happens if you get people talking about a situation that they're in, right? You might have revolution, all right? And to me, revolution is also perhaps inspired by a type of education.
And back to what you said about the difference between intelligent and being an intellectual, that's kind of like the same for being smart versus having wisdom. Because one can be smart, read a lot of classroom books and be smart on, Pythagorean theorem and calculus and everything like that. But when it comes to wisdom you can only obtain from experiencing certain things and having conversations and, reading things that are outside of a specific curriculum. Yeah. So,
this is not to say don't read school books.
Right.
I'm a big proponent of reading. But when you read without conversing with people, then all you are is just regurgitating books.
If you're reading with the sole purpose to retain and regurgitate for a test, you're going to forget that the next year, which is why all the time when you go through K-12 system, you end up learning for the first 2 weeks of school, you end up learning what you were supposed to have known already from the year before.
We have end of year tests. Come on, especially when it comes to standardized testing, stuff like SATs, GREs. This stuff historically is rooted in racist and classist ideologies. Like the way the eugenics movement, where people were sterilized, poor whites and Black people were sterilized so they wouldn't have children because they don't want these people reproducing, right? Is rooted in standardized testing. So it started with the military, right? They were trying to give people tests to see where their intelligence or aptitudes were they measured. So what happens when you never taught anyone to read? You pass policy and legislation because you don't want them to go to school, right? And now you make them take a test. How does that even make sense? And now you're considered dumb. And when you're considered dumb, they'll tie it back to race. They'll tie it back to class. It's because you're a poor white person. It's because you're a Black person. So now we're going to sterilize you so you can't reproduce because we don't want dumb people reproducing.
Yeah.
And this was the beginning of standardized testing and what we now have as SATs and GREs. So this stuff is rooted in classist and racist ideologies. Now you look at these questions. Little Timmy was playing golf. He putts the ball 10 feet. How can a kid, a poor child, know what putting is? This is classist. This is racist, right? But we continue to give these, and by we, I mean social higher education institutions give this stuff power by continuing to buy into this racist and classist stuff.
And when we talk about schooling, in the school system, I think a better structure for schooling, we don't have to worry about how can we implement this. It's just let's identify what a better structure would be. And for me personally, I think a better structure would be, individually talking to these students, figuring out what goals do they have, then figure out what information do they need to, what plan do they have to achieve those goals. Then you need what information is needed.
How old are these kids?
It doesn't matter because we can even instill in our young kids, we can instill it early in their age. What do they want to do? What do they aspire to be?
See, I think that's where you and I would part ways. Because for me, it's why do we have to do that to our children? Why can't they just have a childhood?
Right.
The very idea that it's like you have to have a goal, you have to have something you want to do at such a young age. Why? Like, what's the purpose of that? Like, let's let them find out for themselves what they want to do. Like, here's a trumpet. You don't like it? Okay. Here's a math book. Oh, you like that? Okay, cool.
So would that mean just giving them a childhood? Would that necessarily mean taking away early childhood schooling?
No, not necessarily. But I mean, but
I was thinking that they have to go to school. This is this is the approach that I was going with.
Yeah.
They have to go to school, K through 12 or whatever it is. Which we can talk about even more. Why is there a K through 12? Why are there grades? But if they have to go to school, I feel as though a better structure would be for them to figure out some more things on their own instead of us telling them what they're going to learn.
I guess for me it's that all of this isn't imaginary. All of this presupposes, it assumes that we care about our children, right? And it also, in a way, dismisses the fact that we have poor children who are coming to school hungry, or children who are going through domestic violence cases. Like, all these things is so multi-layered, right? That to begin to think that a school can provide all these other things, the student, the child or the student in the abstract is perfect. A kid comes to school, right? They're well fed, they're well behaved, and by well behaved I mean they sit still. Kind of a 5-year-old, sit still. But we're training them, we're socializing them to think that this is a good thing.
Did you ever hear of the young kid from Baltimore who wrote a poem, and it was called "I Didn't Have a Pencil"? Oh my God! It was such a powerful piece for such a young mind, and it basically the poem was about the fact that this boy grew up. He talked about his life growing up in poverty. His mom worked late. She oftentimes worked 2 double, triple shifts. Was barely home. He had a little sister. He had to make sure that she was fed in the morning. That he had to walk her to school. And then he gets to school after doing all this daily routine that he has. And he gets to school and his teacher complains that he didn't have a pencil.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
So it's like we're expecting him to have a pencil, but we not once think about what this kid is going through at home. The fact that this kid is 12 years old, 12 or 14, and is basically raising his little sister, making sure that she eats breakfast, making sure that she's washed. Sometimes he may have to pull on dirty clothes because they didn't have the laundry done, so he had to pull his uniform out of the dirty clothes hamper and go to school like that. But what the teacher is worried about the most is why they didn't have a pencil.
But that's the point. That child is a real child going through real experiences. But we don't think about that child. We think of students in the abstract, this imaginary kid who comes from a perfect 2-parent household, right? We imagine this kid. So even whatever system we can come up with as a school system is maybe just a Band-Aid on a bullet wound, because there is a systematic types of repression going on around us: poverty, racism, sexism, all this stuff. right? God forbid that this kid ends up being a black kid, gay kid who's poor, right? Oh yeah, it's over. And he's 5 years old and he likes to move around. Oh yeah, because we also know that in middle school, the children who are suspended the most are black and Hispanic boys, because these boys are deemed as more dangerous, right? When they do something, it looks more aggressive. 84 to 86% of K through 12 teachers are white women. So when these boys, and you and I were to do something in class, we would be perceived as more dangerous, as more aggressive, than if a white male was to do these things. So on top of being hungry, feeding your sister, yada yada yada, now you add on race on that, you add on a class, you add on all these things. Like whatever you do to the school system, it might matter, it might not, because you still have all this other stuff you have to deal with.
And a lot will disagree and a lot will agree also, but some say that even the fact that you and I would be more energetic in the classroom that's trying to tell us to, be still and be ready to learn. Yeah. They would say that was the start of, ADHD and ADD. And
oh yeah.
And some psychologists will say, no, this is a real mental illness that we should pay attention to. Yeah. And I don't want to touch that word because I'm not a psychologist, but I will add the experience of me getting in trouble just because I came to school just a little bit too hyper. Because I had a good morning, or because I was excited because the next day was my birthday. And I'm excited because I'm thinking about all the things I'm about to do the next day. So of course I'm energetic in the classroom, but I'm talking too much. I'm moving too much in my seat. I keep getting up. I'm being disruptive. So I'm sent to the principal's office. Just because I'm excited.
And throw on race on top of that.
Exactly.
So, all these things. No, absolutely. I was diagnosed with ADHD. And I was seeing that I was all these things. And when I look back, I'm like, man, I was really hyper. But I'm like, I was hyper, but that could have been embraced in a different way, as opposed to this is as horrible, this is wrong.
And why does it necessarily have to be a bad thing that a young boy from the ages of 3 to whatever, 14, is hyper? That's why our parents put us into things like football and basketball to utilize that energy that we have. And
kids who can afford it, right?
Yeah, of course, because not everybody can afford it.
What happens to kids who can't afford that? And I mean, it's that's what I'm saying. Like, it's so multi-layered. It's so multi-layered that's why sometimes when I have conversations about the school system, like, maybe there are things that we can do to make it better, to better understand our children. But it still doesn't dismiss. And I think we should be having these conversations, but it still doesn't address the systemic parts of it. So this is why I think Band-Aids are good, but then when you put a Band-Aid on a bullet wound, you're gonna need a lot of Band-Aids.
Think about, like you said, it's multifaceted. We don't think about the kid who is coming to school having a bad day. We don't think about the kid who came to school and is having a great day and is feeling very energetic, but now that kid is being disruptive because he's so hyper. We don't think about things outside of this imagination of the perfect student. We don't think anything outside of it.
And it's crazy that I agree with everything you're saying. And right now we're focusing on the student. What happens to the teacher? Right? This, who is also a human being.
Right, yeah.
We also abstract the teacher. That a teacher is a non-racist, non-sexist, they're not homophobic. They're not all these things, right? That's a lie. Right? Which is why this whole idea, this logic of guns in schools for teachers is completely just illogical. Because it presupposes that we're abstracting the teacher, that the teacher is a rational thinking human being.
And then what happens when you get the teacher who is hip to everything that we're talking about right now and starts to create their own curriculum? Then that teacher is automatically pushed out of that school.
Yeah, because we don't want that type of person in society.
We don't want an intellectual, just like you said.
Exactly.
It's so merry-go-round. So we can go on and talk about education and the school system and everything like that. Like I said, feel free to drop comments. I would love to see what your guys' opinions are on it, on the issue and everything. But also subscribe to our channel, subscribe to the channel QuiySpeaks TV. Turn your notifications on, because next I'm going to be traveling to Chan University of Pennsylvania, which is the first HBCU founded in 1837. And if you know anything about that date, that is before emancipation. That is before slaves were free. That's before it was even legal to teach black people to read or write. So we're going to talk about the racial discrimination that is going on right now to this day, that is currently hurting Cheyney University of Pennsylvania. So since we're right on the topic of education and institutions, I think this is very important to create this documentary about Cheyney University. So, tune in, turn on the notifications so you can get notified as soon as that that documentary drops. And I look forward to seeing you guys in the future. Stay tuned.
Fresh boys on the track.